I was concerned when I was asked to come here because I thought I might be endorsing a hagiography. And that certainly is not what I intended to do or what I intend to do right now. That's what generally these book launches end up being. So I had those reservations. In a sense, I was happy that I was asked because that provided an answer. I'm not known to be a sycophant of anyone. So the fact that I was asked, in a sense, reflected or suggested an openness, which I thought was meaningful. Besides, it's a subject I'm extremely interested in. The book is timely. I didn't have time to read the book like my previous speaker, but as a photographer, I could leaf through the pages with the photographs. That is something which is within my area of expertise. And because I did, one of the things that struck me was the fact that not a single photograph had credits to any of the photographers. In fact, the cover photograph doesn't credit the photographer either. That was worrying for me because, you know, here is a book that talks about rights, that talks about respect, and here we have pictures being used without any reference to the author, without any, and certainly the book does not have a picture editor of any form. You can see that there, but that so little importance was given to those issues of rights of artists, of rights of authors, of intellectual property was something that jarred with me. But that's really not what this book is about. I mention it in passing because I think it is relevant to remind people of those things that need to be addressed, and particularly in a country like mine where it is so rampant. I think having a book of such prominence, doing that gives the wrong message. I'd like to, but I digress, because what we're really talking about is a resilient opposition leader resisting, fighting autocracy, foreign meddling, democratic backsliding, all of which are extremely important. Whether we have a potential leader capable of shepherding a turbulent nation to a stable, egalitarian, and thriving nation is what we should be debating. I have actually had the privilege of speaking to him personally. I spoke to him once during Hasina's regime, when Hasina was in power, again once after she left. What struck me was that he'd done his homework. I brought up the accusations that were happening after 5th of August about how BNP was behaving in some of the same ways as Army League had been behaving. And that concerned me as a Bangladeshi citizen. I was pleasantly surprised that he was not defensive. He took it on board. You could see that he had addressed this. And from, we were very open about it, and he talked about how he'd taken specific action to ensure that they did not happen. And he was not in the state of denial that we've always had in the past, because this is what all regimes do. But what all regimes also do is that they're in a state of denial and do not address it. Here was a person who was prepared to take it on board, and I later spoke to the head of police in Bangladesh, and he was telling me about how Tariq had actually reached out to him, giving him a list to say, these are the people you need to book, you need to put them behind bars. I know that they're my party people, but that is not what it's about. I think at the end of the day, this needs to be done. Whether that happened or not is another story, but politics is more complicated than that. But what happened when I met him after Hasina's departure was even more interesting, because I tabled a lot of things that I felt should happen and continue to feel should happen. He'd done his homework. He knew the figures. He had actually looked at some of those possibilities. I didn't always agree with his answers, but I could see that this was a person who wasn't taking it lightly. He was taking it on board. But since we're talking of books, I'm tempted to quote the editor of one of my books, Vijay Prashad, who in his recent Tricontinental newsletter has some observations which are pertinent, I think, to today. He talks of Chile, and he talks of a very interesting statement there. He says, they took so much from us that they even took away our fear. And that is what happened in Bangladesh. You had a completely repressive regime which had full spectral control on the media, on the police, on the judiciary, even academia, and unarmed youth were able to bring her down. It was a phenomenal example of people power that I think should give us pause. I also think that it is something that future governments need to remember, because that people power remains. And should they behave the same way as before, I hope and I believe that they too will face the same situation. So I hope that that is something that people take into cognizance. Now that has happened elsewhere too. I mean, high school students in Chile were between 14 and 18. Ours were a little bit older. But similar movements have happened in India, in USA, in Sri Lanka, and now in Nepal. It is something that is happening. It is something we need to recognize. People will not take that shit anymore. And I think it is important to recognize that there are young people out there who are rebellious, who feel they want a different form of governance, and that the governed will insist on having a say in the process of governance. And I think that's very, very important. They took to the streets to reject a failing system. Another very interesting thing needs to be remembered. In South Asia in particular, there's a youth bulge. We are a very young community. There is also unemployment. This youth is the most educated youth in history. And they're not prepared to be shoved down the line to do menial work and things like that. They want fulfillment. A change of regime will not in itself solve this problem. The change has to address systemic issues, and merely change at the top will not do that. So the question remains, how can a person who's been away from a country for so many years write about it? Does he feel the pulse of the nation? Can he engage with the public? Is he the leader Bangladesh has been waiting for? We don't know. What a politician promises before election often is not the same as what he delivers after elections. That too is something we need to take into account. But what we need to discuss is how the approach that he has differs from the approach of others. Because that is all we can decide at this moment. What will happen afterwards, we need to decide on the basis of the actions that they take afterwards. At the moment, these are propositions, and we need to analyze them on the basis of that. Is he capable of implementing them? And whether he genuinely aims to implement them or not, or whether this is simply electioneering, is something we need to consider. This is not a novel, and frankly, it's not a particularly lucid reading, but there are questions that need to be answered. The man has not been tested. Is he capable of holding a party together that has been in the wilderness for nearly 2 decades? There's some factual inaccuracies as well. I mean, there is a reference to 3,000 lives lost. I mean, I'm not sure where that reference comes from. I mean, the UN talks about 1,400. That includes people who've died after the 5th of August. So, yeah, perhaps there is a basis for 3,000, but I'd like to know. It's a figure that's been planted without the backing of it. What's the source? But there are interesting things, positive things as well. I mean, the book talks of Tariq Rahman sharing a caricature on his own social media. That's very, very different. I mean, a stark contrast from school kids who were jailed for having done a similar thing in previous regimes. So we recognize that. It also talks about recognizing the role of farmers and laborers. The real hero of Bangladesh are our farmers in the field, our migrant workers, our garment workers. They are the ones who've given us this privilege. All of us here sitting are privileged people. Our privilege has been largely fueled by people who we give very little regard to, who we treat abysmally, regardless of which regime it is. Whether we are different is something we have to see, but here is a person who appears to be addressing those issues and recognizing that. So will the leadership lead to what the book suggests is a qualitative transformation of the state and politics? We need to see what happens in the streets in the months to come. Will provide the answers. Is Tariq Rahman simply aiming for a win in the upcoming elections? Or is he someone who hopes to lead Bangladesh into a new era? We hope it is the latter, but only time will tell. And one of the things I want to leave you with is that tyrants are there. I mean, today tyrants are all across the globe. There are autocrats everywhere. One of the reasons they get away with it is not simply because of what they do, but because of our silence. Because we have allowed them to get away with things they should never get away with. And it is really up to us to ensure that tyrants, that people like Tariq Rahman, that all other political leaders are questioned, evaluated, put on the docks and made to answer. And it is up to us to ensure that we bring about that accountability. But I'm hopeful. And one of the things we must resist is being a cog in the wheel, because, of course, they thrive on fear. And true, I mean, there's been extrajudicial killings, there's been disappearances, and all the things that have continued to happen. But, you know, one of the things that also happens is when people like us feel, what's the use? How can we resist? What difference can we make? And we give up. And the minute we give up, we've actually become a cog in the wheel. The repressive regime no longer needs to be repressive. Repression becomes normalized. Because we, by accepting that position, have normalized resistance. And we've done their job for them. So it is really up to us to ensure that every step, at every moment, we make that difference, we ask those hard questions, we hold them to account, everyone, including Tariq Rahman, including people on this stage. And that is something we must constantly do, because that is what will bring about change. Because, believe me, on that throne, given that opportunity, given impunity, they will all behave the same, regardless of what they say. And I think there are differences, there are good people, but even good people get corrupted, given that opportunity. And it is really up to us to ensure that Bangladesh remains on the track. Too many people have given their lives, too much sacrifice has been made, too much blood has been shed for us to return to status quo, for us to go back to the way it was. I believe it can be different. I believe Tariq Rahman is perhaps a person who can bring about the difference, but it is really we, through our active resistance, who will ensure that that change is permanent. Thank you.